Okay, so today is going to be a bit more of a serious video because I will be discussing topics that are deeply important to me personally, as well as just generally in society. For those of you who don't know, the focal point of this discussion will be an article that was published reviewing Bridgerton Season 3 through the lens of attacking Nicola Coughlan's physical appearance. I will not link this article or tell you how to find it because I do not want it to get any more success, any more clicks, any more notoriety than it already has. But I will be directly quoting it because I think it's important to give an accurate depiction of what exactly is being said so that I can then respond to it and analyze it properly. I want to make it clear that I am not happy to be offering this kind of rhetoric any additional exposure, but I do feel extremely compelled because I think these are important issues, and I know firsthand how damaging this type of rhetoric can be, and I think it's important to denounce it. I also know that Nicola has talked about not being comfortable with the discussion around her body, which is completely valid. And in respect of that, I really won't be discussing Nicola as much as I will the issues that this article brings up at large and my own personal experience with these types of things. But again, if this type of media is going to exist out there, I really think it's important that there is media that is combating and analyzing and dissecting it. And I honestly really wish there were videos like this and people having these types of nuanced, complex discussions about these issues when articles like this had been published my entire life. I also would be making this video regardless of who the actor or celebrity this was written about was. It doesn't matter if it was someone from Bridgerton or not. Unfortunately, this author chose to use Nicola as a scapegoat for her own projection and misogyny and internalized issues. And I really hate that she's wrapped up in this at all because she doesn't deserve it. It's not fair to her. She didn't ask for this. But like I said, I will be focusing less on Nicola and more on these issues at large. I'm going to begin by just offering the direct quotes from the article around which this discussion is based. So these are direct quotes. And so, the unspoken final frontier of oppression is also the most debilitating, not being hot. As the sociologist Catherine Hakim has written, erotic capital is a key part of an individual's ability to progress, impress, and make money. It is certainly important if you want to have a lead romantic role in big American productions like Bridgerton. Attractive people, noted Hakim, have easier, more prosperous lives. Love and sex, as well as money, often come to them more easily than to the plain, old, or chubby. The only physical attribute that works against universal erotic capital in almost any context is fat. That's the first part. This is the majority of the article, by the way. These excerpts that I chose is the majority of the article. So in reference to Penelope, podgy Penelope, Nicola Coughlan is the star, finally attracting the tender gaze of perfect 10 Colin Bridgerton, whom she has long loved and supported from a friendly, yearning distance. Penelope's frame is not generally named in Bridgerton's world, but her bookish sexual marginality and apparent destiny to be unloved by Colin forever is clearly its result. Her life on a plump periphery of the svelte and beautiful. And lastly, but reader, she is not hot, and there is no escaping it, as I was reminded recently when she graced Harper's Bazaar's cover in a fabulous outfit that still did not change her not hotness. Coughlan is an actress of great value and might be adored, but she is simply not plausible as the friend who could catch the handsome, rich aristocrat Colin Bridgerton's eye in that way. She's not shapely, which can work as sexy even in Hollywood. She's fat. There's nothing wrong with fat. It's hardly a moral shortcoming, but a zest for equality and diversity, and in this case, good acting, just isn't enough to make a fat girl who wins the prince remotely plausible. In the cruel visual semantics of the screen, poor plump Penelope may be set up to win her man, but will she win her audience? The jury, dear reader, is out. I honestly have a hard time not getting emotional reading that, as I was when I read it yesterday. There's so much wrong with it in so many different ways. It's truly a little baffling that this even exists. And again, it's so preposterous that I think it's important to talk about all the ways in which this is just so utterly and completely incorrect, not to mention wrong to publish in the first place, but also factually incorrect. I want to begin by saying that the general assertions about the advantage of being attractive in society are not exactly incorrect. We often hear dialogue about pretty privilege, and it is obvious that, our society is rampant with fatphobia. That is an irrefutable fact. So she's not incorrect when she states those types of things. So the erotic capital, as she puts it in the article, is not an insignificant factor in success societally, romantically, sexually, financially, or socially. And that is a sad truth. This statement, the only physical attribute that works against universal erotic capital in almost any context is fat, is likely not objectively false. Again, rampant fat phobia all throughout. We see this. This is very evident. This is a prevalent issue within our society. We face it at every single turn. But there's so much more discussion to be had about the intricacies of these dynamics that is completely neglected in this article, which I think is reckless and completely and utterly negligent. So that's what I aim to discuss here today. First and foremost, it's important to note that physical attractiveness is entirely irrelevant to worth as a person, which this author does seem to acknowledge, but that's later contradicted by statements that she makes about believability or validity as a romantic lead. And I'll delve into that a little bit later. The first topic that this brings to the forefront is the concept of what is considered conventionally attractive and how those beliefs come to be held and established within society. It is an irrefutable fact that our perceptions of what is and is not attractive is in large part due to social conditioning. These ideas are ingrained into us from such a young age and are such an important fabric of our society that it is almost impossible to discern what is true, what is real, what is objective, what is realistic, and what you actually believe, as opposed to what you have been made to believe your entire life. Who is to say that had we grown up in a society that idolized and worshipped bigger bodies as much as they did, say, a skinny body, that we wouldn't have the exact opposite opinion? Who's to say that we wouldn't grow up with the same belief that skinnier bodies are unattractive and undesirable and wrong had we been fed that our entire lives, just as we had with bigger bodies? So much of our beliefs, perceptions, and perspectives of the world are shaped entirely by this social conditioning. Attraction in general is entirely subjective, which isn't discussed enough as it is. We behave as though there is a standard and an ideal, and that applies to every single person and everyone must fall in line, but that's simply not the truth. It differs for every single individual and is influenced by a plethora of different factors. But for so many reasons, this article is so wrong, because if we are trying to talk about someone that doesn't fit the conventional standards of attractiveness, Nicola Coughlan is simply not the person to try and make this point with. The assertion that Nicola Coughlan is generally unappealing or unattractive is patently false. And to imply that Nicola Coughlan holds no aesthetic appeal whatsoever to the average eye is absolutely preposterous. I could wax poetic about all the things that makes Nicola Coughlan conventionally attractive, scientifically proven. She's very symmetrical. She has all these qualities, but the fact that I feel the need to even defend and extol her beauty to people in order to make them see that this is wrong is maddening to begin with. But yet again, the unrealistic standards. I don't know how the rest of us are supposed to compete or fare if an objectively very beautiful woman who fits most all standards of conventional attractiveness is considered not hot or not attractive. What are the rest of us then? But it's also important to note, which I will get to later, it doesn't even matter. Even if Nicola Coughlan wasn't as beautiful as she is, it's entirely irrelevant to her worth and value as a person, let alone a romantic lead. Generally, I think it's better to avoid commenting on someone's appearance, but it feels necessary to dissect the nuances here and to take a look at what this author is actually saying and implying and expecting us to believe also. This argument obviously becomes tricky in the entertainment industry because so much of it is about aesthetic appeal. And Bridgerton is a good example of how physical attractiveness is utilized and capitalized on. That's one of the factors that makes Bridgerton so appealing. It's beautiful and it has beautiful people. That being said, it's also really rare that in actuality, someone that is a celebrity is genuinely unappealing. There are an odd few, but for the most part, if you're on a movie screen or a magazine cover, the likelihood is that you're not unattractive. But even that being said, people who might be considered ugly or unattractive, conventionally speaking, might be attractive and appealing all the same, as there is so much more to physical attraction than physical attributes. Sometimes the way someone moves their body, the inflection of their voice, so many little details can influence how attractive someone is to you physically. It's also relevant to note that this article is not written from the perspective of an opinion. It is written as though everything that is said is objective truth and fact, which is just incorrect. There is no part of this article that says, in my opinion, or to me, or personally. There are no qualifiers that explain that this is a personal opinion that is not universal. In fact, it implies quite the opposite, which in and of itself does a sort of gaslighting to readers that if I'm stating something with such certainty, it must be true, and you must fall in line. Which I think a lot of people would think, oh, I'm not susceptible to that, but you are. There are subconscious elements of persuasion at play here. It's important to note also that attraction itself is so nebulous and so malleable, it's not even funny. I will expand much further on this later. But again, this is just a gross misrepresentation of the idea of what is and isn't attractive, and what qualifies as attractive, and what that even means or looks like. This is the portion that misogyny in particular plays a very crucial part in, and I have realized this from my own personal experience, which I am going to explain a little bit, and I really urge people to listen to this and be open to this, because for the longest time I was so oblivious to these societal norms and standards and toxic beliefs that I had grown up with that were seeping into my own life, my own thoughts, my own mind and heart, that it was a revelation when I started to see this for what it was. And I think it's important that we examine this kind of rhetoric. My perception and belief about my own attractiveness was entirely dependent on other people's opinion of me the majority of my life. The general worth of women is so dependent on their physical appearance, whether people like to acknowledge that or not. The decision about whether or not a woman is worthy of time, love, attention, respect is so much influenced by whether or not people find her physically attractive. I realized this discrepancy from a really young age, and I fell immediately into line with it, because what else was I supposed to do? I wasn't presented another alternative. Again, this was presented to me as fact. This was the only way forward. This was the only thing that made sense to me. When I was younger, I was considered generally unattractive or ugly or fat often. I was bullied. And unfortunately, fat is effectively synonymous with ugly and unattractive. It was almost the worst thing that you could be called. My perception of myself and my worth was completely based on where other people ranked me, which was low. I accepted that I was just simply ugly and unattractive because that's what these people were saying. So it must be true. Once I got to high school, all of a sudden, the script completely flipped, and I was on the exact opposite side of the spectrum, where everybody was telling me how pretty and hot and attractive I was and hitting on me. And my mind followed suit with that as well, just as easily as it did in the first place when I was being called ugly or unattractive. There was no perception of my physical appearance which existed independently from the general consensus of those around me. If enough people told me I was ugly, I was. If enough people told me I was hot, I was. Never mind that descriptors such as these are extremely subjective to begin with. Once I noticed this pattern and really examined it critically, I came to an extremely disturbing conclusion. These standards are first and foremost upheld and instated by men, and women fall into line. The social hierarchy of my school was completely dependent on what these boys declared and decreed. How literal children of fresh double-digit ages came to be the arbiters of good taste and have such a disproportionate influence on my own perception of attractiveness, of beauty, of popularity, of worth is unbelievable. But it's a systemic problem. The girls in my school were only as pretty or worthy as the boys had decided they were. I believed what I was told. It became objective truth, reality, and fact. It was based on zero critical thinking, objective reasoning, or even personal opinion of my own. I realized that not only was my physical attractiveness being decided by boys and men at every turn, but subsequently my social capital and value was. And if you break that down one step more, what I realized is that essentially what this meant is that my worth as a human being was entirely dependent on whether or not these men wanted to have sex with me. That is what I was worth. And not only to them, but to the other girls in my grade and to myself. The objectification of that and the misogyny that is the root of that is undeniable. And yet it took me so many years to even identify it as such because it just was truth and fact and law. Unfortunately, so much of women's value is influenced by their physical attractiveness. And the same simply cannot be said for men. Now I want to get into the fat phobia of it all, and I'm going to be sharing my personal experience yet again with this. This is a really complex topic, and my personal experience with it has guided my understanding of the construct as a whole. When I was younger, I was constantly called fat. I came to realize that fat, in public consciousness, did not just mean fat, and it did not even mean fat in some instances. Rather, it was synonymous with ugly, gross, bad, unattractive, unworthy. In the environment I grew up in, there was really one specific body type, and I was the only person that fell out of that category. I developed quicker than other people. I had a different body type, so I stuck out like a sore thumb immediately. Anything that wasn't string bean stick thin was automatically labeled as fat. So there I was. What fat even means, or what even qualifies as fat, is now more uncertain than it has ever been. I'm sure there are many people that are watching this right now that would consider me fat or plus size. Just as I'm sure there's a lot of people that would scoff at the idea that I would be considered fat or plus size because I'm too small to fit into that category. These terms are so nebulous, and everyone has a different understanding and perception of what it means and what it looks like. I mean, Jennifer Lawrence, when I was growing up, was considered plus size. Think about that for a second. It's absolute lunacy to imply that Jennifer Lawrence is anywhere near plus size. And yet, that's what was ingrained into me. The public perception of what qualifies as fat is so unbelievably warped. And I grew up being told over and over again that essentially anything that wasn't stick thin size 0 was fat. I now understand how ludicrous these assertions were and how harmful it was to my perception and opinion of women and women's bodies in general, and mine in particular. There's no room for nuance whatsoever when, in fact, most people actually fit somewhere in between the two on the spectrum. The perception of what a normal body looks like is consequently brainwashed beyond belief. It took me a really long time to separate the adjectives of fat and ugly, to understand that they were not in fact the same thing. I now see that this is a characteristic that is so widely debated in the first place, but even if it weren't, it is entirely irrelevant to your worth as a human being. It means nothing about you as a person. It means nothing about how smart you are, how kind-hearted you are, how worthy you are of love, what type of job you can do, what you can offer the world. It is completely and entirely irrelevant. Also, you can be both fat and attractive, which blew my mind when I finally put this together, because again, there's so much rhetoric around, well, she's pretty for a fat girl, or, her face is pretty, and, things like that. It has been ingrained into us to believe that a fat person is automatically unattractive, which just is not true. Attraction in and of itself is so subjective to begin with. There are people who prefer bigger body types. There are some who even fetishize it. And I'm not saying that that's good either, but it's just a complete misrepresentation to behave as though these are totally and completely universal standards by which everyone abides and everyone agrees, when there's so much variety about attraction and what people find attractive and who people go for in real life. It is true that fat phobia is a very real thing and is very prevalent in our society, but it is also true that there are many people who either do not care or in fact prefer a bigger body. To behave as though that's such a ludicrous idea is entirely misleading. Also, again, like I said, fat means so many different things to so many different people. So it's not even a quantifiable quality by which you can even judge people, because it differs from person to person. The way that I grew up, when I got out into the real world more, I was absolutely shocked to find that walking around, I saw a lot more people who looked similar to me than anybody who had been shown to me as the standard or the only option or body type in media. These extremely thin ideals were not only the only body types that I had been led to believe were commonplace, but the only types of bodies that people were attracted to. And again, that's not to say that there aren't skinny people either. There absolutely are. There's a lot of skinny people. But to behave as though one is better than the other, or one is universally more liked than the other, or that there is more of the other, or should be more of one or the other in the world when it's such a wide spectrum and every single person's body is completely different, has different issues, has different qualities, has different histories and stories and things that it needs to do, is just ludicrous. There's such a wide array of types of bodies that exists in between these two opposite sides of the spectrum of fat and skinny that are extremely common and therefore attractive, just on statistics and data alone. This attitude implies that only plus-size people are with plus-size people, or that you have to be with someone that is proportionate to your own size. The way that this author speaks, you would think that there are no fat people ever who have ever been found attractive ever in society once, which is just insanity to imply. The assumption that a 10, such as Colin or Luke Newton was referred to in this article, would never even deign to date someone above a size 2 is just patently false. Not only is it not implausible that someone of his physical appearance could find someone of her physical appearance attractive, but what's more is that physical attraction encompasses so much more than physical characteristics. I'm not trying to behave as though it's insignificant, but it is, in the grand scheme of things, such a small factor in what actually makes up love and attraction. Attraction itself can also fade or grow over time. I can't tell you how many times I have found someone to be extremely physically unattractive only for that thought to completely change once I got to know them better and saw their personality and they were super funny and super engaging, and I all of a sudden found them physically very attractive. My brain literally rewired to take those factors into consideration and literally physically changed the way that I saw and perceived him. The same can be said for the opposite situation, where I found someone extremely physically attractive, and the more that I got to know them or be around them, I would find them absolutely, genuinely, physically repulsive and repugnant based on their personality or their beliefs or things that they said or did. So attraction itself is absolutely influenced by these outside factors that have nothing to do with physical appearance. Which is what's also so crazy about this, because on a baseline level, the assertion that someone like Colin could never find someone like Pitt attractive is crazy. But also, I have to laugh. I really have to laugh. What this article is implying is that this person who is his best friend, who he loves as a person, who he feels more comfortable with than anybody he's ever known, who he can laugh with, who he can be his true self with, somehow that doesn't factor into how attractive he might find her at all. What are you talking about? How is that irrelevant to how attractive he finds her? It's absolutely very relevant to the attraction between the two of them. Physical chemistry, even. There are so many other factors that come into attraction of a physical and sexual variety that this author is acting like are just completely irrelevant. So the idea that someone like Colin would find someone like Penn attractive is not only not implausible, but it's not improbable. It's actually likely, especially given their relationship. I don't say this to be reductive or uncouth in the slightest, and I speak from personal experience when I do say this, but one of the things about the article that felt so crazy, it really felt like I was being completely gaslit, was the implication that nobody would find Penn attractive, when, in fact, one of the only qualities, physically, that is universally attractive is breasts. It just is. Whether it be straight men, straight women, gay men, anybody in between, that is quite literally an aesthetically universally pleasing sight. Scientifically proven. The aesthetic appeal of breasts and cleavage is quite literally undeniable. Even when men didn't consider me attractive, they considered my cleavage, my breasts, attractive. That was, in fact, sometimes the only thing that they found attractive about me, which is not what I want. The objectification and dehumanization and hypersexualization of that is not what I'm after. But to say that there's nothing physically appealing about Penn to anybody is just crazy. It's just crazy. I find it ludicrous to claim that Penelope Featherington, with the amount of goods that she has, and how advantageously they are being displayed, that no one notices that or no one finds that attractive whatsoever. Give me a break. Everyone does. I'm looking respectfully and a little disrespectfully sometimes. So sorry. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. And that's not even a personal opinion. That's universal. I would venture to guess that almost everyone who watched that season absolutely would sneak a peek at that and would find their eyes drawn to that and would be attracted to that, regardless of literally any other factor. What's extremely sad about this interview and my own internalized just misogyny, fatphobia, all of these things that I've worked so hard to deprogram within myself, is that one of my first thoughts was Luke Newton needs to come out and denounce this. And I'm so disappointed that that was an immediate thought of mine. The fact that my immediate reaction is the need for a conventionally attractive man to prove that someone above a size 2 might be attractive or appealing in general is really disappointing. And it says a lot. Why am I predisposed to think that people won't believe that? Why does a man need to be the one to make the final decree on whether or not a woman is attractive? It's still the standard that I, in my mind, am setting it to, or rather, more accurately, think, oh, well, if he said this, then maybe people would start to believe it. How crazy is that? How crazy is that? That the attractiveness of a woman cannot exist independent from a man's opinion. It's truly upsetting and disturbing. But regardless of everything that I just laid out, Nicola Coughlan's appeal as a romantic lead is about so much more than her physical appearance. And it is saddening and disheartening and disturbing to think that that is not being acknowledged. And in fact, the opposite idea is being peddled to the masses. That's something that this article doesn't seem to understand about life, fictional or otherwise. It's not a fantasy that someone like Coughlan could be attracted to someone like Penn. In fact, it's commonplace. It happens every single day. Attraction in and of itself is such a mystery and differs from each individual. How many times have you seen a couple walking down the street and you think, how did that person get that person? Well, it doesn't matter what you think, what your personal opinion is, as long as they find each other attractive. Just because you don't personally think someone is attractive does not mean that they are not objectively attractive or that there are not a bunch of people who would find them attractive, as this article implies. Not to mention that physical and sexual attraction, particularly, are about so much more than physical attributes. Genuine love, admiration, or respect for a person's mind, heart, or soul can and does directly translate into physical and sexual attraction. They're not completely separate from one another. It's also so rare that we ever see think pieces dedicated to the plausibility of a woman finding a man attractive. It's always assumed that there's a reason why the woman finds him attractive. I found myself doing this against my better judgment, against my better knowledge. I see a couple where the woman is very obviously more conventionally attractive than the man, and my brain automatically fills in the gaps. Oh, well, he must be super funny. He must treat her super well. They must have a super great connection. They must have great chemistry. He must be great in bed. He must be rich. All of these elements that my brain works overtime to immediately substitute in to explain and justify this apparent perceived disparity, in my opinion, for men is not extended to women in the slightest. It shows how easily men can be and are considered worthy of affection, time, and attention completely regardless of their physical appearance. Whereas at every single turn, the plausibility of a certain man finding a certain woman attractive is interrogated time and time again. Women and their worth as human beings and romantic partners are so much more than their physical appearance. And to suggest anything to the contrary is deeply, deeply misogynistic. As someone with the experiences that I have had with these types of concepts, I find it extremely disappointing, discouraging, and disturbing that not only was this kind of article written, but then was approved to be published. This is the perpetuation of harmful and patently inaccurate statements and beliefs about humans, attraction, fatness, romantic appeal, and it's being stated as fact. Unbelievable. The fact that this propaganda is being spewed to the masses is extremely dangerous, especially in this particular context, through the lens of talking about this popular show, because so much of our perception and understanding of what qualifies as beauty and these standards and our understanding about attraction and what people should aim for and what's attractive is so heavily influenced by the entertainment industry, Hollywood, and journalism. If you're told over and over again that something is ugly, it can often be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the assertion, just on a baseline level, that there's no world in which anyone could find a woman above a size 0 attractive or a suitable romantic option for them, which has so many issues in and of itself. But let's just say that were true. Let's say that were universal fact as a baseline. Who are you to say that this kind of representation couldn't alter that? How can you be sure that having a woman who happens to not be a size 0 as the romantic lead of one of the biggest shows on Netflix, that might also have an impact or an influence on opening people's eyes to the diversity and vastness of beauty in general. As long as you reinforce the narrative that something is bad or wrong or implausible, it will be just that. The public perception will become that, despite what one might see in reality. The same can be said for many other types of discrimination and oppression, like racism, like homophobia. And of course, those have their own issues completely separate and aside. That's for another video. But the principle is the same, because there's actually nothing in objective truth, fact, or reality to suggest that any of these things are right, other than the fact that we have been told that they are. This article is so harmful in so many ways. Firstly, Nicola Coughlan is just an objectively, aesthetically appealing person. It is kind of crazy to suggest otherwise. Secondly, attraction itself is entirely subjective, varies widely, and is based upon so much more than physical attributes. Thirdly, there's just absolutely no evidence based in objective truth or reality that someone like Coughlan finding someone like Penn attractive would be implausible, other than this author's personal issues with projection, fatphobia, and internalized misogyny. It is the continuation of propagation of unrealistic standards set for women. And it's based in a hatred of women. It's based in an objectification of women. It's totally steeped in misogyny. It reeks of it. So, not entirely Bridgerton related. Bridgerton inspired, I guess. But I will see you for yet another video very soon.